Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Eborn, and I am here today on behalf of the marketing team with School Health. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today and for participating in our hearing screening webinar. Today, we'll be hearing from Dr. Carrie Browning, who is a licensed audiologist with Mako Diagnostics. She will be helping us get to know the how and why of hearing screening for early childhood, dealing with children who are aged 0 to 5 years. Before I turn the time over to Dr. Browning, I'd like to review a few quick things about today's webinar. First, we will not be taking audio questions during the webinar, but you can submit your questions through the questions interface in GoToWebinar. You can submit your questions anytime during the presentation, and we will take questions in the order that they are received after the presentation is over. Dr. Browning is planning on taking about 45 minutes for her presentation, which will leave us about 15 minutes for questions after she has finished. Of course, this webinar will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be posted on our schoolhealth.com website. We will also email each registration, or each registrant, I'm sorry, a link to the video for future playback. Everyone who attends the webinar today will also be receiving a certificate of attendance for joining us today. You should be able to keep an eye on your email and receive that within a few hours of the completion of today's webinar presentation. If you are having technical difficulties with the audio or visual portion of today's webinar, please contact GoToWebinar directly at 855-352-9003. Again, that number for GoToWebinar is 855-352-9003. And now we'll turn the time over to Dr. Browning.
All right, thank you, Ryan, and thank you, School Health, for allowing me to do this presentation for you all. Yeah, we want to focus on those hearing screenings for that young age group, that 0 to 5, just to get you to know how and the why of why this should be completed. So with the agenda today, what we're going to do is go through some basic anatomy, how we hear, the importance of hearing screenings and why they should be conducted, also the hearing screening recommendations or the protocols, and then also the hearing screening process. So with the basic anatomy, there are three main portions of the hearing pathway to discuss. First is the outer ear, which consists of the visual portion of our ear, which is called the pinna, and the ear canal. The outer ear ends at the eardrum, or the other name for this structure is called the tympanic membrane. The middle ear is an air-filled cavity that starts at the eardrum. It also consists of the three smallest bones in our body called the incus, the malleus, and the stapes. And this is where the eustachian tube also is connected to the middle ear. And this allows us to equalize the pressure in that middle ear space. So when you hear your ears pop as you go through altitude changes, this is a sign that the eustachian tube has opened. The middle ear is also where ear infections occur, and the fluid can fill into this space and cause some mild hearing loss. The inner ear consists of the cochlea, which is the snail-shaped structure and is dedicated to hearing. This is where the sound pressure signals from the outer ear are converted into electrochemical impulses. And as we continue on through the hearing pathway, those electrical chemical impulses are passed on to the brain via the auditory nerve. The auditory nerve sends the sound to the cortex where the cognition of the sound occurs. Here's a video to demonstrate how the sound passes along the hearing pathway. There's no sound to this video, so I'll just be talking through it. So as the sound is presented, it is carried through the ear canal and contacts the eardrum. The eardrum moves with those vibrations, which in turn will then make those three bones in the ear canal move. And this acoustical energy is now turned into mechanical energy. The last bone, called the stapes, is moving in and out of the entrance of the cochlea. This entrance is called the oval window, and this is where the stapes is pushing in and out to move the fluid within the cochlea, as this is a fluid-filled structure. This movement starts the transmission to the hair cells. As this fluid is moving into the sounds being presented, there's a shift on a membrane, which is called the basilar membrane. And this initiates the movement of those hair cells to create those electrochemical impulses to be carried along the auditory nerve. So just see that transmitting up. There you go. So here's another video. This is also demonstrating our hearing pathway along the our hearing along this auditory pathway, but this is going to focus more on how the cochlea responds to the sound. There is sound associated with this, so I'm going to see if I can pull that up, and no. So let me just walk you through what's going to happen as we start this as well. Let's see. There we go. So the same thing, the sound is being presented into that, or being passed into that ear canal, hitting that eardrum. Those bones are moving. When you're looking at the cochlea, it's easier to kind of just explain this as it's rolled out. So what happens is you have the high frequencies at the base of the cochlea and the low frequencies at the apex. So you can kind of see how those sounds are being distributed. This is actually like a classical piece of music that's being played right now, and you can see how it's moving all along that basilar membrane, or within that cochlea, so that those hair cells can be stimulated and the sound can be processed up into our brain. So it goes all along that whole cochlea there. You will get a copy of this presentation, and you can also find this video on YouTube. There's going to be a link there for you to access, so you can actually hear what's actually being presented. The thing that I wanted to share with you about this, though, is that even though we're listening to this complex piece of music, this is not all that's being detected by our hearing system. That not only are we listening to that one piece of music, but we're also listening to some background noises that could be in our environment as well. But it's what we will pay attention to and what we are cognitively aware of. But just so you know, those sounds, as they're being processed, you might have, even if you're listening to that classical music, you might be in the car, your motor of your car is running, or you might be at your house and the refrigerator motor is running. Those are also things that are being picked up and being processed, but we are just maybe not paying attention to them at that time until maybe something happens, maybe a weird sound is coming from that motor, that then our attention can be directed to that. So all of that information has to be processed at one time within this hearing system. So it's a very complex system that we're dealing with. But now let's explain now that I explained how we hear, let's look at why early childhood screenings are important. So we know that hearing loss is the #1 birth defect in the US, where 1 to 3 babies in 1,000 have some form of hearing loss at birth. We also know that hearing loss can be acquired later in life, and this impacts about 6 to 10 in 1,000 school-aged children. This acquired hearing loss could be due to a trauma or some genetic cause, among many other things. There's an estimated 20% of all cases of childhood hearing loss are progressive in nature and are acquired after the newborn hearing screening period. So this is why it's really important to continue to monitor children's hearing after birth and throughout childhood. We are lucky in the US that we have universal newborn hearing screenings were started right around the year 2000. From this continued screening process, we know that the majority of babies' hearing is screened, with only approximately 3% not screened at birth, which is a great number. That's an amazing percentage. But let's break this down just a little bit more for our purposes. So the following information I obtained from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and I took the information that they've provided in the year 2016. So in this year, there were almost 4 million babies born. And of this number, approximately 2% were not screened, which equals about 74,000 babies. And also of those that were screened, over 65,000 had a refer outcome. And although there is a follow-up process to finalize the hearing screening for both of these categories, within 2016, approximately 50,000 babies were lost within that follow-up process, and no status was reported. There are many reasons for this loss to follow-up, but a few include parental refusal or infant death, hospital discharge, being screening before the screening was completed, maybe the baby moved out of jurisdiction, or no follow-up response from the parents. And here's a chart that shows that loss to follow-up rates. This chart's a little dated. It's from 2007 to 2010, but it kind of gets my point across that we can see that within this time period, it was pretty consistent. This loss to follow-up percentage was between 40 to 50% for all of those particular years. And although there has been much more focus to reduce the loss to follow-up from the reports in 2016, this number is still at over 37%. So we know that there's a significant number that we just don't know their hearing status. And so because of that, the early childhood screening programs are just a natural extension of that newborn hearing screening program. One is because we do have access to the kids. They're there. We have the ability to take this on and to be able to screen them. Also, this high loss to follow-up numbers and how many kids each year or their hearing status is unknown, we need to find a consistent means to continue the screening offering. So that's one of the reasons that we want to continue on with the preschool screenings or the school screenings. Also, this age group has a high rate of ear infection, which impacts their hearing ability as well. And this can be caught in the screening program as well as for medical follow-up to get them into those doctors' offices if needed. And knowing that hearing loss does occur after birth and being able to monitor this in the kids and provide intervention as soon as possible. The earlier hearing loss occurs in the child's life, the more serious effects on that child's development. And similarly, that also the earlier the problem is identified and intervention began, the less serious the impact on that child. But what are those consequences of undiagnosed hearing loss? Well, hearing impacts speech, language, learning, and social skills. But I also want to give you a little bit more information and some examples to specifically how this impacts them. So just when we're looking at vocabulary, we know that this develops more slowly in kids. We also know that with vocabulary that they learn concrete words much easier, such as jump and cat and five, versus abstract words like before and after. And difficulty understanding words within multiple meanings is also a consequence of this for vocabulary. When we get into the sentence structure, we know that the kids will produce shorter and simpler sentences. They also have problems understanding and writing complex sentences. Also, if they cannot hear endings of words such as the S or the ed, which leads to misunderstanding and misview of verb tense and pluralization. And what about speaking? Well, if they can't hear the sound, then it's going to be pretty hard to produce it. So some of those low-level sounds, such as the S's, the SH's, the F's, they're going to miss these and not be able to produce them. And also, if they can't hear their own voice to monitor their loudness or our pitch or our intonation or inflection, like that's all part of that communication. And if they're not able to hear that well, then they can't really produce it either. As far as academic achievement, it especially impacts reading and math. We know that if a child has a mild to moderate hearing loss without any type of management, they can achieve to 1 to 4 grade levels lower than their peers. We know that if a child has a severe to profound hearing loss and there's no management, that they don't achieve higher than a 3rd or 4th grade level. And also this gap widens as they progress through school and more things are being learned and demanded upon them. But any degree of hearing loss can impact a child's individual and standardized test scores as well. When we move to social functioning, we know that with social problems such as isolation, they just not have friends or very many friends, they're just unhappy. And another aspect is the cost. So I have $1 million there, and what's that regarding is that there was a study conducted in 1999 that it said that society cost can be as high as $1 million per person's life. This is, of course, higher levels for those with more severe hearing losses or little or no intervention. So it does grow with those aspects, but still a significant amount of cost is on society for those that are not there's little or no intervention. But even when you're looking at like this number, this $1 million or less than that, depending upon how severe their hearing loss is, within the study they found that 67% was lost to work productivity. So, and 21% was for special education services. So providing the services is not where the majority of the costs are incurred. From this, we can see that there is a monetary importance to reduce this cost on society through early identification and early aggressive intervention. So continuing on with the importance of preschool screenings, the most important stage of language development occurs before the age of 3. The earlier detection and intervention provided, children can meet age-appropriate language and concept development. So this allows these kids to have equal footing with their hearing peers. And research indicates that children whose hearing losses are identified in the first 6 months of life and who received intervention services developed language within the normal range. So you can see that the work being done to complete the hearing screenings in the 0 to 5 age range plays an important part in early intervention and minimizing the negative consequences for these kids. This is another video that I was going to play, but because we can't get the audio through the webinar, once again, you'll be provided this link, but what it is it's just going through what it actually sounds like to have a hearing loss. So it just has a running speech going on, and then it gradually will display a type of hearing loss. So it goes from mild to moderate to severe. And so just so for you to have some type of a idea of really truly what's happening, what these kids and adults are hearing when they do have a hearing loss. But also when you're listening to this, try to keep in mind that this is just that interaction, just that conversation that's being had. There's no background noise going on. So once you get in an environment where there's some rustling of papers or other kids talking and that type of thing, that can also make it even harder for them to understand and get that communication that they need. So let's move to the hearing screening methods for early childhood. Hearing screening has been around for a very long time. Pure tone hearing screening methods have been widely used since mid-1960s. But one important change that happened in the mid-90s was the introduction of the otoacoustic emissions, or what we call OAE technology. OAE's technology was first introduced for the universal newborn hearing screening programs, but now it is the recommended method for that 0 to 3-year-old population in the early care and educational settings. Preschool hearing screenings are recommended by a variety of organizations. This includes the American Academy of Pediatrics, this Joint Committee on Infant Hearing, American Speech and Hearing Association, and the American Academy of Audiology. And as far as the guidelines you should follow, I would first identify if your state has any statutes or regulations for hearing screenings in that 0 to 5 age population. If not, I would recommend you research your department health guidelines for your particular state. I tend to see the screening statutes mostly focused on the older school age population, not all, but the majority. But looking into the State Department of Health may provide you some guidance as well. So there's some states that provide very detailed and great guidelines in that early childhood population. So take a look at that. But if you do not see anything, if you don't see anything within your school statutes or within that Department of Health for your state, then that's when I would encourage you to move on to AAA, the American Academy of Audiology, or ASHA, American Speech and Hearing Association, to review their guidelines and take as much as you can, that you can incorporate as much as you can that's feasible into your particular program. Here I have listed AAA's recommendations for our discussion points. So American Academy of Audiology, their guidelines say that pure tone screenings are for 3 years or older, chronological and developmental age. And you want to screen at 20 dB at 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 hertz in each ear. They also say that otoacoustic emission testing is for that 0 to 3 years of age, or only for preschool and school age kids that just are not able to perform the pure tone screening. It's just not developmentally appropriate for them. So that's what is out there for the AAA guidelines. But let's walk through what we should do for the hearing screening. So the first method that we're going to talk about is the pure tone hearing screening. And with this, with the pure tone audiometry, an audiometer is used. This device provides the information along the entire auditory path, because not only is the signal being presented, through that ear canal, through that middle ear space, up along that auditory nerve. But then the child actually has to hear it and physically raise their hand or give you some type of an identification that they've heard that signal. So that's why this is a subjective test, because they have to hear it and provide you the indication that they've heard it. And it's recommended that this is for those kids 3 and older, and also developmentally able to be responded. So when you're looking at your audiometer, you really only need to have an air only device for when you're doing the screening programs. You don't need to have anything really beyond that. But as you know, performing pure tone audiometry on this 3 to 5 age group can be very challenging. Just explaining what they need to do most times will not work, especially when working with that 3 to 4 age group. So I have some tips and tricks to provide to you to help you through this process. So first, when testing this age group, we typically do what we call this conditioned play audiometry. And what this is that you are conditioning the child for the response while guiding and assisting before the screening actually starts. So it's all about playing a game. So get some toys with them to interest the child. You could have blocks or rings on a peg or a barrel of monkeys or any kind of stacking toys, anything that you have, like a group of toys that either can get you through the screening process or at least get through maybe like one ear, collect the toys again, and then you can use them again for the other ear. And as you are conditioning or playing the game, you're getting them to understand that when they hear a beep, they are to put a block in the bucket or a ring on the peg, so that they know what they need to do before the screening actually starts. And depending upon the age of the child, this could take a few tries. Some recommendations as before you get started as you're trying to condition the child is you can place the headphones on the table. So that way you're instructing them that when you hear the tone, you don't place the block in the box or in the bucket, and both of you are hearing it at the same time. So that way you can give them some visual cues as well, that hey, that's the sound that you're looking for. That's when you need to be able to put that block in the bucket. So that's one way you can do it. Another thing that you can try is guiding their hand. So put the toy in their hand and guide as the tone is being presented, guide their hand into placing the block into the bucket as well. And so eventually what's going to happen is once they get it, they know what they need to do, you're going to feel them moving towards the bucket right away. And then at that point, okay, now we can start moving on through the screening process. But even though once you're at that point, you still need to get those headphones on the child. You want to make sure that if you are starting at an elevated level, you always reduce it down. So you reduce it maybe not a little bit higher than your screening level. So maybe about 50 dB you would start. You'd still do the same kind of game concept. When you hear that beep, place it in. As long as they're moving and they're able to follow the instruction and do what you need to do, then you can gradually decrease the level until you get to that screening level, which is typically about 20 dB. So as you're putting those headphones on the ear, a few things to keep in mind. Also, headphone placement is critical, making sure you have the red phone on the right ear, the blue phone on the left ear. Also making sure that they're kind of placed centered over their ears, that you don't have any glasses or there's hair out of the way. Just get it so it's comfortable, because those can be kind of tight. You're going to start at that elevated level, like I said, maybe about 50 dB, and then as they respond, decrease it. And then once you get to that 20 dB level, that's when that screening starts, and you don't necessarily need to move it off of that level. You can just leave it at 20 dB and move through the different frequencies. Some other tips that I can provide is changing the signal type. So typically with all audiometers, you can change how that signal is being presented. So can be steady, there can be pulse, there can be warble signals that are being presented. And I typically like the pulse and warble one if that's available on your device, just because it can sound a little bit more like a bird. And so you can bring that aspect into the game as well. If they are getting distracted, just re-instruct them, hey, we're almost done. Let's listen to those beeps, that type of thing. Just kind of get them engaged again as much as you can. And also don't be providing visual cues. So although you might provide some visual cues when you're training them in the aspect, when the screening actually starts, there's no visual cues that can be provided to that child. So you want to be, concentrating on your face, and if you're looking up as the tone is being presented, that can be their visual indication that, oh, now they want me to put the block in the bucket. That you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you're not providing any, you're not looking at them, you're not, giving any type of an indication that that sound is now being presented. Also making sure that your hands are covered so that, they can't see your hand movements as you're presenting the tones from that audiometer. You're going to want to like either have some type of either position the audiometer so they can't see your hands and don't move your hands very much as you're doing the test, or you can put some type of a barrier there too, that so that they are not able to see your hands. Also with the screening, you want to be setting your screenings up in the least distracting location. So you don't want to be in front of a mirror or in front of a window where there's a playground outside, or a hallway where people are going to be passing by, because that can easily distract the kids. We recommend that AAA recommends that you get 2 responses at each frequency, but you do not present any more than 4 presentations. So you can, present the signal. If they respond, present it again. If they respond, you move on. But if they don't respond, just make sure that you're not presenting any more than 4 presentations. The reason they recommend that is because then it's not just a coincidence that they placed the block in the bucket, but it truly, that they heard that signal. Of course, with this age group, you have to move quickly. I don't think I have to tell you that, but yes, you do have to move quickly. And another recommendation is to have a refer result, is have some type of a form or something that you can provide to the parents. We find that typically they will act more on a refer result if they actually have some type of a physical paper to take with them. So please distribute that to the parent so that they're aware that they do need to do some follow-up at that point in the screening process. The results of a pure tone screening include a pass result. This is when the child responds at the screening level for all frequencies and in both ears. If they have a refer, this means that they did not pass either one frequency in one ear. So that's the minimum amount that they would not pass, and it still is considered a refer. So just even one frequency in one ear did not get at that 20 dB level, then that child does need to go through the refer process that you have in place. If you do have a could not screen, that is also another notation that you can make in the screening process. If you could not screen, you want to make sure you're documenting that results. And this could just be a lack of cooperation or inability to condition those pure tones for that child. And in these particular cases, this is where I would move on to OAEs. So this is where I tried my pure tone testing. I wasn't able to get the child to condition to those responses. Let's just move quickly on to the OAE and continue our screening program. So another test process you might have heard about is select picture audiometry, and this method is where there's a 2-syllable words are being used as the signal, and the child is to point to the picture when they do hear that word through the headphones. Select picture audiometry is used by audiologists within their diagnostic test processes. So that's where this first came from, and they've been using it for many years. But when working with very young children, audiologists use multiple test methods to confirm their findings and make sure things are looking consistent from one test to another. So they don't only use select picture audiometry within diagnostic testing. They're using a variety of things to make sure everything's looking consistent. With select picture audiometry was introduced within the screening method in the 1990s, and this was prior to OAEs being a practical offering within the early childhood hearing screening program. So this allowed for those younger children to be tested that just wasn't possible with standard pure tone audiometry. But now with OAEs as the standard for those not being able to continue on with the pure tone audiometry, select picture audiometry is not the recommended method as a screening tool by itself. So you can certainly still use this tool, but you want to use it in conjunction with other devices. So one of those methods that you might use it for is determining if the child will be able to perform pure tone audiometry. Users have found that if the child can perform this test, then they typically can move. You can typically move them on and perform the pure tone test. This test is pretty quick, and you can also direct, be able to know what test method I should use next and ensure that I know where to go from here. So if those kids are just I'm not quite sure where I should go, if I do OAEs or if I want to try the pure tone, this is a great tool that you can use to kind of find out, yep, they can follow direction. Yep, I think they can perform that pure tone and move on with the pure tone test. So how does select picture audiometry work? Well, select picture audiometry is done with this device that's shown here. It's called the Pilot Test device. And this is a device that does not only offer select picture audiometry test methods, but it also offers standard pure tone testing as well. So it has kind of like a dual functioning device. That's why it's a good method to try the select picture and then move on to the pure tone if they're able to. So you can easily switch between these two methods. And how the test works is the child first must know the pictures. So you're going to want to, work with the child, making sure that they understand and know all the pictures that are on the picture board here that you can see that's in front of that little girl there. So you before you would even start the test, you would go through those, make it a game. Here, show me the cupcake or show me the hot dog, that type of thing. Make it a game for them. And then once you know that they have all of those words, they understand all those words, then you can actually start the test. Put the headphones on. It's going to say word in the instruction of the device. It's going to say, show me the hot dog. This is nothing that the tester has to do. It's all being done through the device. This test starts at about 50 dB, so it's at that elevated level, and then it gradually goes to that 15 dB level, and so it kind of gives them that same concept that things are going to get quieter and I need to pay attention. Also, this device is offered in both English and Spanish, so those kids that speak Spanish, this can help you, as well. And then how it works with the tester is that they can see the image on the screen, and you also want to make sure that you can see the child's response. So the child shouldn't be able to see the screen. The tester needs to see that so that they know what word is being presented, and then you just can mark and check. Yep, they selected the right word at the level that it was being presented. Here I do have a video. There's no sound that needs to be for this video, but this is just kind of showing it how it is showing it in action here with this little girl. So the device is telling her, show me the bathtub, and then she'll just point to that bathtub. I love watching this little girl. I think she just, she's very determined to get that word and show that picture. It's very, very cute. So the second method to discuss is going to be that OAE hearing screening method. Otoacoustic emissions, so just to give you an idea of what they are, otoacoustic emissions are low-level sounds generated by the outer hair cells in the cochlea in response to a sound. So it's kind of like an echo. Something is being introduced into the ear and sound are coming back out of the ear that the cochlea generates on its own. There are two types of signals that can be used with OAEs. One is called DP or distortion product, and this is where there's two tones being presented into the ear at one time. And the other type of signal is transient, and this is just a click stimulus. So either can be used for OAE screening methods. We tend to find that in the schools, the most popular test signal is the DP OAE. So that's what most people are using within that 0 to 5 age range. So here you can see you have that probe in the ear. The sound has to go through the ear canal, through that middle ear space, then finally to the cochlea where that snail-shaped structure is, the cochlea. And then what happens is that cochlea is sending that echo, that sound back into it. And that sound actually has to then go back through the middle ear, back through that eardrum, and then being picked up by that probe again. And so this is why noise and anything that could be impacting that signal will interfere, and that's why they're very susceptible to the middle ear pathologies. Even though it is a practical screening method for a variety of ages, newborn all the way up through adults can have this test done on them. Some of the disadvantages, it doesn't detect mild hearing losses, that any auditory neuropathy spectrum disorders, so anything that the hearing loss is after the cochlea, those would not be detected with this particular device. And as I said, they're very impacted by middle ear pathology. So if you have an infection or something in that middle ear space, that sound, one, is going to be very difficult for it to go through that space, but then also even more so to come back out to be picked up by that probe. On the right side of the screen, I just have a couple of images there for you so you can kind of see what a normal outer hair cell looks like. Those outer hair cells on those 3 rows there, those are what normal outer hair cells. And then that bottom picture is just where some hair cells have been damaged. That can be due by, noise exposure. That could be due by, ototoxic medications. But if those hair cells are not there, then they can't provide that stimulation that's required to send it up onto the auditory nerve for one, but also to come back out and being picked up by that OAE device for another. An OA test is an objective test where the child does not have to do anything. They just have to sit nice and quiet for you. So this is the perfect test for that age range of those 0 to 3 years age. But as I said, it can also be used on other kids as well. It can be used on kids with special needs. It can be used on ESL kids where there is a language barrier to provide instruction, or just a child that is just not capable of performing the pure tone test. So with OAE testing, it does evaluate the ear canal to the cochleal. As I said, it stops at the cochlear. So anything beyond that, it's not going to be able to detect. But it's a very good screening tool for this population. And of course, you do need to have an OAE device to conduct this particular test. So when you're performing OAEs, one of the first things that you want to do is you're going to do a visual inspection. So one, you're just going to look at that outer portion of the ear, make sure, note of any abnormalities that you might find. You're going to gently pull back on that ear lobe or the pinna, just to take note of what size I'm going to be using to put onto my OAE device. But also you're going to be looking if there's any blockage or drainage, or if there's like a foul smell. That this is just telling you things that you do not want to proceed and you want to refer them to a medical professional. So that's the importance of that visual inspection. When it comes to conducting an OAE, you're going to review the probe tip, making sure there's nothing blocking that probe. If something's blocking it, then that sound can't get out and it can't be picked up. So you just want to make sure that there's nothing wrong with that particular device before you actually start the test. As you said, you're going to visually inspect the ear to determine the correct size, the ear tip size. But OAE process is age dependent, where it varies by the age group. So those smaller kids, those babies, you're going to want to make sure that they're quiet. If they're sleeping, they can even be like sucking on a pacifier, or eating, that type of thing. As they can certainly be doing that as you're conducting the OAE as well. But so that those young kids, you're just going to want them to be as calm and relaxed as possible. But as you get to the older kids, and that's where it can be a little bit more challenging, and that's where you're going to want to find something to distract them. Either give them a toy to play with or have them watch a video. Also with the older kids, I would explain to them kind of what's happening, that you're going to be hearing some beeps, or you're going to hear this birdie in your ear. You just sit nice and quietly for me. A lot of kids are very sensitive with anything up by their ears. So you might want to just show them the probe, show them that it's not going to hurt, put that ear tip on and show them that there's no sharp edges or anything like that, just to give them an idea of what's going to be happening. But you have to kind of play it with the kids that you're interacting with, and which ones you think you have to give a lot of information to, and which ones you think that'll be fine. Just they're so involved in the video that they're watching that they don't even recognize that you're even there. So take that into consideration. As far as inserting the probe with the infants, which is about 6 months and younger, you have to pull back and down on the ear. And with the older kids, so 6 months and older, you're going to be pulling up and back on the ear. And that's just to straighten out that ear canal as you're placing that probe in place. And when you're putting it in place, you're going to be inserting it towards the nose. So placing it, kind of twisting it in as you're facing, kind of placing it towards the nose. Then you're going to kind of, once you have it in quite a ways, then you're going to kind of push it back. And that's because we have a little curve in our ear canal, and that kind of just directs that probe into the direction that it needs to go. Once it's in place, and I wouldn't be worried, as long as you have a probe tip on the ear, I would not be worried about getting it in too deep, because these are very soft sounds. We want to get that probe in as far as we can. And those ear tips are not going to allow you to get it in too far. So just be aware of that. Once you have the ear tip in place, then you're going to be pressing start. The device will go through this calibration check, and then it will continue on with the test. This test takes about 20 seconds. So you complete one ear, and then you just switch over to the other ear and do the same process. With OAE, the device provides you the results for you based on the protocol that's set up. So it's nice that if I get a pass, I know that it met the protocol criteria of that particular device. If I get a refer, then I know that it did not meet, and I need to follow my next steps that I have in place within our facility. But what happens if I could not get a screen? This could be due to it was blocked. Maybe it was too noisy of an environment. The kid was moving too much. They were crying, that type of thing. Or if I get a no seal, that just means, maybe I have too large or too small of an ear tip on, or I wasn't placing the probe all the way in. So any of these types of blocked, noisy, no seal, then that would be my could not test. And I would have to follow my facility's next steps as far as what I do in those types of scenarios. With every OA screening device, you will have multiple protocols built in from the manufacturer. And typically the difference between these protocols is just the averaging time. So what this means is that how long is the device staying at each frequency as it's averaging those responses. These are typically 2 seconds or 4 seconds. So the longer the averaging time, the more accurate the responses that I will get from that particular device. So that's why we always recommend, if you can select the protocol that has a longer averaging time, that's the one that I would go with. If I know I'm not going to have much time with these with a child, then maybe that's when I would switch to my 2-second protocol. But it really is a difference of between 8 to 16 seconds as once the test has started. So another passing criteria is looking at the SNR value. So this is looking at the OAE level and subtracting the noise floor. And that's where I get my signal to noise ratio. And that's this column here. So on any printout that you have, you can review this and the device does the calculation for you. So I just need to look at my SNR column and make sure that it's at 6 dB or greater. The next criteria is looking at the DP amplitude. This is the actual level, the DP response level. And so on this particular one, I would like it to be at about 0 dB or greater. So I look at this DP column. If I see 0 dB, 0 or greater, then I'm good with those results. But this is something when you're looking at the DP OAE amplitude, this might be something that is not set on with your device. You'd want to look at on the instruments, the manufacturer's manual to determine, is this something that's defaulted on or not. You might have to go into the settings and actually turn this on for your particular device. So just keep that in mind. And then another criteria is just that's set up into the device in most devices is that 3 out of the 4 frequencies must pass. So if I'm looking at this last column, I see that I have a P next to all the frequencies that I tested. And so I know that this is a good pass result that I received from them. So that's what this numerical information will provide to you. This is what the protocol that is set up within the device. So you'll just want to look at this one, the device that you have, the protocol that you're using, and make sure that it's consistent to what I have shown here. Some tips and tricks when it comes to OAEs is just ear tip selection. And I wish I had a magic statement that I could just provide to everyone, but it really is a trial and error. Sometimes people go up in size, sometimes people need to go down in size. So unfortunately, it's just kind of getting accustomed to your child base. Am I usually in that 3 to 5 doing this test, or am I 0 to 3, whatever it may be, and just get comfortable with what ear tip size that they may need. There are foam ear tips that are available for devices, and this is a nice way to kind of meet the needs of a variety of sizes of ear canals. The unfortunate part with the foam ear tips is that they might not fit those really small kids, so the babies basically. So you might have to use the other tips in that regard. As far as the placement of the ear tip, you really want to make sure that it's all the way down on that pro, because that will introduce some noise or problems with the testing as well. So making sure that ear tip is all placed all the way down onto that pro where it's touching the connection area there. And also know that ear tips are specific to the device, that you can't use ear tips from one manufacturer for a different manufacturer's device. You want to make sure that you're following the manufacturer's guidelines and selecting the ear tips that they've recommended for you. Also, I would recommend it once you're going to start your screening process, your screening program, is that you want to have multiple probe tips on hand. So this is not the ear tip, this is the probe tip, and this is typically what will become blocked. So if you have multiple of these on hand, then you can just easily swap them out and continue on with your screening process rather than not having them, and then you're just on hold until you get more in your facility. When it comes to OAEs, it is recommended that there should be no more than 2 attempts for the OAE test. So it's not something that you're just going to want to continuously do OAE after OAE. So if you've done 2 attempts, then I would stop unless there was some equipment problems or environmental interference that you are aware of. Then that's when maybe you could continue on. So just be observant to those types of things within the screening of that particular child. And then we also get a lot of questions about, what about PE tubes? So with most devices, there can be a setting that you can kind of bypass a portion of it to continue on testing a child that has PE tubes. What I would recommend, though, is I would start as you normally would with that. If you know that child has a PE tube, I would just start as you normally would and perform the measurement. Only if you're picking up problems would then I would resort to the process that the manufacturer recommends of bypassing this calibration portion of the test to be able to continue on conducting the test even with a PE tube in place. So OAEs can be done even if PE tubes are in place. First, I would just do the test as I normally would, and then if it's not working, that's when I would look at the manufacturer's guidelines and see if there's a way that I can continue on testing with PE tubes in place. The problem is that we are looking at a specific volume in the ear when we're running those tests, and with PE tubes that volume becomes very large, and that's why it can be a little bit more difficult to test with PE tubes in place. So this information comes from kidshearing.org, which is part of the National Centers for Hearing Assessment, which is NCHAM, and it's managed by the Utah State University. And NCHAM serves as the National Technical Resource Center for all state-based EDI programs in the United States. So they have a lot of information on this population. So this is their pass refer collection rates and that I'm presenting here. And this is a good source for you to be able to compare your refer rates to and determine, am I much higher, am I much lower, whatever it may be, just to see if maybe I have a problem with my screening protocol or my equipment, that type of thing. So that's why I place this in here. But when it comes to pure tone screening, for those kids that I'm able to test, I would expect about 10% of those kids not passing that first go around of the screening test. So then what happens is that I would wait about 2 weeks, and then I would screen that child again. And if the child does not pass on that second screening, that's when I would refer them on for the middle ear evaluation, go to a medical professional. And then once they have medical clearance from that professional, then I would perform the third screening and just say, okay, yep, everything's good, I got my result. And if not, then that's when I would refer them on to the audiological evaluation. With OAEs, what happens is that you have your 100%, and after that first screening process, about 25% of these kids may not pass. So that's where I'm going to wait that 2 weeks. I'm going to rescreen them again with my OAE measurements, and that's where they're finding that about 8% of those kids may need to have a medical evaluation. Maybe there's something going on. They have an ear infection, middle ear pathology that needs to be looked at. So they would refer on for their medical evaluation, and after they receive their medical clearance, they would perform that OAE measurement again, hoping that all is good. And what they're finding in both of these cases is that less than 1% of the kids actually need to continue on for an audiological evaluation. So just screening outcomes, I just wanted to make the statement that screening results are just a picture of a child's hearing at one moment in time. Screening is not perfect, and ongoing observation by families, teachers, home visitors, or other staff provide important aspects in monitoring any child's speech and hearing. So encourage families to speak with their child's healthcare provider anytime they express any concerns about their child's hearing. Even if they pass the screening, if there is concerns that a child has, then I would always encourage them to speak to their healthcare provider and follow up in any way that they need to. What I've done with the presentation is I do have a lot of the sources that I found or used within this presentation cited here, so you'll have access to those when you receive this presentation. All of them are here, as well as those videos that you weren't able to hear. Those are also available for you to go online and to view as well. One of my contact information is at the end of this slide, so if there's any questions that maybe we don't answer today or something comes up in the future and you'd like to reach out to me, certainly do that. You can always contact me through email or through the phone to get any of your questions answered, so please do that. And we also have partnered with Mako, and School Health has partnered together to provide a promotion for you. So this is specific to the School Health, exclusive to them, that we're offering $200 off a Mako pilot test audiometer, or $225 off the Mako AeroScan. So either of these two devices, you can receive a discount if it's purchased through June 30th of this year. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan. I think I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan.
Thank you, Dr. Browning. That was a lot of really great information. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, great. It sounds like there was a little bit of a lag with the audio.
I'm hearing you.
Thank you. That was great information, Dr. Browning. We really appreciate it. Just to let everybody know, on the screen right now, we do have the information about the exclusive offer between Mako and School Health. Again, saving $200 off of the pilot test audiometer, or $225 off of the Mako AeroScan. That does run through June 30th. We know that a lot of schools are out and dealing with the coronavirus issue right now, and so we did not put a short clock on this offer. This is available for all of you through June 30th. Dr. Browning, if you'd like to advance your slide. We do have Dr. Browning's contact information here. If you'd like to reach out to her directly with questions, she is offered to be able to make herself available to answer any questions. I do have some questions that have come in here as well that I will field over to you. And I know that we saw a few of these, or I saw a few of these be answered during the presentation, but we'll just touch on these very quickly. We've got a few people who have asked about autistic children and testing for those who are nonverbal, who might not want to sit still for a test. And I know that or you touched on that a little bit with OAE, but can you offer any advice for dealing with younger kindergarten age, pre-K, autistic children, nonverbal?
Yeah, well, that's where those OAEs are really beneficial for that particular population. So if you're not able to get them to sit through the pure tone, or even if they'll even allow you to put headphones on them, is another aspect of that. So that's where having an OAE device is going to give you that information and be able to perform those screening measures.
Excellent, thank you. We talked about, or you talked about audio or auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, ANSD. We've got a question from Jerry Lynn talking about ANSD. I think that you mentioned that it's a structural problem past the cochlea region. And Jerry Lynn is asking, is this a structural, an anatomical problem that will cause a chronic problem with hearing and learning?
Yeah, because the signals are just not able to be processed appropriately. So it's not that the child isn't hearing, because signals can be sent up and to the brain and be heard. So it's not always necessarily a degree of hearing loss, but definitely it's just the signals are not coming in the way that they need them to come in. So you'd want to work with an audiologist and speech language pathologist closely on if anyone is ever diagnosed with something like that, that you'd be working with those professionals to assist you with that.
Okay, great, thank you. We've got a few questions that have come in about rescreening. So if we've got a child who had an initial fail, is it okay to rescreen after a couple of weeks? I believe we touched on this as well. A couple of the questions have also commented about the potential of congestion or inner ear fluid, if they happen to have perhaps a cold or a sinus infection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so definitely you should have a screening protocol in place for your facility. Typically, what's going to happen is you have your initial screen, and so any of those kids that fail, then you are going to want to rescreen, and that's typically done within a 2-week period. Because if there is anything medically going on with that ear, maybe they do have a cold, they might have an ear infection, maybe they're just getting over an ear infection. All of those types of things will certainly play into that refer result. So having that rescreen in place at about 2 weeks after the initial screen, hopefully those issues have resolved, and then you do the rescreening, and then they hopefully pass. But as I looked at those, I showed those screening. Go back here. Even if you do that after that second screening, then that's when you're going to want to send them on for a medical evaluation if there is still a refer result. So to make sure that there isn't anything going on in that middle ear space, because we know that these kids are so susceptible to ear infections at this age. So sending them on for medical evaluation. Once they return back, and you have medical clearance, then that's where I would perform another screening. And then at that point, if there's a refer, then that's where we want to really go into referring them to an audiologist or some other professional, so that they can have this follow-up hearing test done. And we can certainly rule out any hearing loss. I didn't go into a lot of detail on the actual steps of the protocol,
Okay.
but certainly you want to have a couple of rescreens in place.
Okay, thank you. We've got one last question here, and the question says, what time of the year is best to screen hearing? I find in the winter time, they are usually congested. So we kind of talked about that a little bit with the last question, but is there a time of year that is best to do hearing screenings?
Well, unfortunately, it's really not up to us. A lot of times we are required to have them completed within a certain time frame. So, if you're looking at, you're right, in the fall, there could be allergies, in the spring, there could be allergies, and in the winter, there could be, because of all the colds that are going on. So I'm not sure there is really a best time if you don't have access to those kids in the summer months, but you just have to follow your facility's program and making sure that they are screened within the time frame that they require it to be done. So although we know that there are, there could be some problems with a lot of kids because of those allergies or ear infections that are going on or congestion, we still need to follow the protocols and processes that are in place for our facility. And when we have access to the kids.
Okay,
that's
excellent.
The other thing.
Thank you. And exactly. All right, thank you, Dr. Browning. We are out of time for today. I know that we have a lot of questions that have come in through that we have not had time to answer. I apologize if we did not get to your question, but we will reach out to you directly with an answer if we didn't happen to be able to answer your question, live now during the webinar. So thank you again for everyone for attending today. We hope you found the information useful, and a big thank you for our presenter, Dr. Carrie Browning, and for Mako Diagnostics for bringing this wonderful presentation to us today. After we all exit the webinar, you should be able to see a survey window, and I would ask that each of you take a moment to complete this brief survey for us and let us know, if this was helpful, if there was information that you would have liked to have seen but different, or I'm sorry, did not. Just give us feedback and let us know, how we did and if we might be able to do anything better to help you out. Again, thanks to everyone for attending, and I will go ahead and stop the broadcast at this point.